Hello, this is Georgina Rose, part-time esoteric content creator and part-time Scarlet Woman, and welcome back to the Dot Darling YouTube channel. Welcome back to another Occult 101 video. For those who are new, this is my series where I give little beginner bite-sized introductions to large esoteric topics to help you have a foundation to springboard off into deeper research. If you're new here, I'm a Thelemite occultist. In this video, we're going to be talking about Enochian, a system of angelic magic that originated from John Dee that can possibly mess up your mind forever. Which for me, that's exciting. Sometimes we want a little risk. Sometimes Moonwater isn't enough. Sometimes we want to summon some angels and possibly fuck ourselves up for life. Sounds fun to me. So that's what we're going to do in this video. I'm going to give a brief introduction on Enochian, talk about its history, talk about kind of basic ritual stuff, give some misconceptions, some advice, and how to jump into this paradigm. First, let's start with the basics of what Enochian is. If you've heard the term Enochian, you may have heard it from the TV show Supernatural. You may have heard it if you're interested in Thelema or Golden Dawn, or if you're interested in Grimtrad. It's one of those terms that a lot of people know the name of and associate with angels, but don't really know what it works or how it's done or the complexity of it. It's one of those systems that when you look at it, it looks very complex. There's a lot of equipment, you've got the tables, you've got the scrying stuff, and it looks really intimidating and scary. At least for me. I remember when I was new and I heard about Enochian, I was staying away from that, not touching that. But of course, like most things, I'm not very good at keeping that up, so I touched Enochian. But basically, Enochian is one of those systems that looks really complex, but the rituals themselves are quite simple, but you need to know that complexity to do the simple ritual. It's a lot of just, when you get into the actual ritual space, it's a lot of just talking. It's a lot less moving parts like you would see in spell work, but rather just a lot of talking. But you have to understand a lot to do that simple thing. It's one of those things, right? You gotta walk before you can run almost, except imagine if running was easier than walking, and then you've got Enochian. So Enochian began with this guy named John Dee. He was a philosopher, a mathematician, an astrologer, and he was the court astrologer of Queen Elizabeth because he predicted her rising to power. And the previous queen obviously jailed him for that and was like, "You're not taking my power from me. That's my power. You're not taking my power." And then when Elizabeth got to power, she's like, "You were right. Out of jail now. Now you're my astrologer. You're gonna help me." And so he was obviously pretty high society, pretty high status. He was very well informed. He was one of the most educated men of his time. And he ended up contacting these angels. And he worked with this scryer guy, Edward Kelly. Edward Kelly was a really good scryer, and he was also interested in what we call practical alchemy, or doing things with you know what I mean? You picture, when we talk about alchemy, in practice, we're talking a lot about internal alchemy or refining your inner self. But he did the physical alchemy. When you watch Full Metal Alchemist, you see the alchemy labs, like that type of alchemy. So together they were a really good team. They spent every single day conjuring these angels and then scrying what they were saying, and they discovered all these amazing incantations, these aethers, these really cool things, and a whole cosmology emerged. They were not as concerned with how to practically use this stuff, but rather were just kind of recording it in this scientific way. They wanted all the information. And one of the most notable parts of the Enochian system is what we call the Enochian language. Though the term Enochian language is a misnomer. It's actually angelic language, and recently people have started fixing that. The term Enoch means of Enoch, which the Book of Enoch is an apocryphal text or heretical, depending on who you ask. But heresy is fun here, and we love some heresy. And so it was really influential on early Christians, and then in John Dee's time, the Catholic Church was like, "That's some heresy, get that away, no, 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 no." And John Dee was like, "I'm here for the heresy." But not really. He actually didn't read Enoch until the angels told him he could, and then it really influenced him. So the language itself is angelic. The language, there's been some skepticism about it, and some people saying, "Oh, this can't be real, this guy was a fraud." But if you actually look at the angelic language, it doesn't really line up with any existing languages. The grammar structure is different. It's spoken from your stomach almost, it's really guttural. And that's extremely unique to it. You don't see that with any other real existing language, which is part of why people consider it genuine. And all the Enochian practitioners definitely think it's genuine. So there's sort of two schools of practitioners, right? There's what we call Dee purism, which is doing exactly what John Dee did. They're emulating exactly his system. And then there's what we call Neo-Enochiana. Most Enochian practitioners I've met fall into the camp of Neo-Enochiana. Neo-Enochiana is what comes from the Golden Dawn. I've talked a little bit about the Golden Dawn. They were an Hermetic order, and they're responsible for a lot of what became modern occultism. And when they sort of turned Enochian into a system, they didn't think it was a complete system because they didn't have all the information that we have now. So they made a system where it was much more complete. They added some things. One of the big differences is how some of the tables look and some of the correspondence is used. And it also got a more Golden Dawn flavor. When they were making this system, you've got to give them some credit. Okay, they didn't have all the information we have. They were working out of mostly diaries. And later on, we found more stuff that John Dee wrote and more information that he put out. So now people can be Dee purist. At the time, it wasn't really possible. So Neo-Enochiana kind of had to be what it is. However, there aren't many major differences, and in practice, that doesn't make a huge difference, right? If you use one system, it's not going to screw you over. If you're a Thelemite or an Hermeticist, I would really suggest using Neo-Enochiana because it's going to be more familiar with what you know, and the writers are going to be people like Crowley or Mathers, who you're probably going to be familiar with and like their style. Dee purism is something that I see more like Christian mystics gravitate towards and Christian occultists, because John Dee himself was very Christian. He was like kind of the historic good boy occultist. Like, you know how people say like Aleister Crowley is the bad boy of occultism, Jack Parsons is the Che Guevara of occultism. John Dee is the good boy. He's the good boy, very good boy. And so if you like his system, you're probably going to be someone along the lines of Grimtrad. And on his system, people kind of get this idea that he invented all of this, or like all of this just came from Dee. However, if you look at the Enochian system, there are influences from a lot of earlier traditions, especially the Jewish Merkaba mystic system. If you guys want me to make a whole video on Merkaba, I can. It's a type of Jewish mysticism. It's not the same as Kabbalah, though obviously Kabbalah does have influence on Dee because Dee was a Christian occultist. Things like Solomonic magic as well, you see some influences. Some of the tables look pretty similar to some of the stuff you see in the Solomonic grimoires. Also, there's a grimoire called Artabel that has a lot of parallels to what John Dee was saying as well, and you can tell that it was clearly an influence on his work. Enochian, while there is a lot that's added new, it doesn't like exist in a vacuum, and there's clear influences on it from earlier systems. In terms of how Enochian influenced what came after it, Enochian is huge in the Golden Dawn tradition. It was taught to their inner order students, or their highest up students, as well as you see it in Thelema, especially with Crowley surfing the aethers through the vision and the voice, which Lon Milo Duquette, I believe, called the Talmud of Thelema. I think he was the one who said it. It may have been Jason Louv, but someone said vision in the voice is the Talmud of Thelema, and vision in the voice is so important, especially if you're like me and you're really interested in the Babylon concept. Enochian is really important to understand. Traditions like Alexandrian Wicca as well incorporate Enochian. If you've ever done the Wiccan Calling of the Watchtowers, you've dabbled in a little bit of Enochian without knowing it. Enochian was super influential on what came after it. The period between the Golden Dawn and John Dee's life are a little bit blank because after John Dee's death, it kind of became a little obscure. It wasn't super heavily used, and it sort of had its renaissance with the rise of the Golden Dawn. In terms of misconceptions, something that comes up a lot is that Enochian is extremely dangerous. And it partially is. Basically what's dangerous about it is, you know how if you look at these Eastern traditions, you advance really slowly through them. You reach enlightenment and the annihilation of the self slowly and progressively. Enochian says, no, we're going to do this fast and we're going to do this now, right now. And so it really jumps you ahead and pushes you into things before you may be ready for it. Enochian is something that you need to be very ready for. You can do small things like calling the watchtowers when you're new, but Enochian is something you should spend a lot of time studying. Study both of the approaches, study the material, and make sure you know what you're doing. Because once again, as I said at the beginning, that complexity is really important to do the simple thing. Another would be about all the stuff. So Enochian has a lot of stuff. There's a very complex setup and it's very strict. However, you can save money on that. While it's one of those where you can't just go, well, I don't want to use any of it unless you're sort of, I guess, taking like the chaos magic approach. With Enochian, I don't really think a chaos magic approach is really that smart. You can DIY a lot of it. There's a big thing where there's the ring. You can do that with paper. That's what I did. I made a little paper ring and then I put a little like stamp on the front and then drew the symbolism on it. You can make your own tables and banners with papers. You can just take you can just buy like a cheap hanging banner and just write all over it. you can make it work. While it may not be as pretty as the setups are, I really suggest doing this at first, because if you realize you try Enochian and realize it's not for you, you don't want to have spent hundreds and hundreds of dollars on equipment. So make sure like you do it resourcefully and you think fiscally responsibly about this. Another B, that getting really deep into Enochian is going to fix your material life. This is one of those paradigms that are a lot less materially focused. While some people have used the Enochian system for like practical occultism or to get things they want, I know there's a book on like success magic that really pulls from Enochian really heavily. This isn't exactly designed for that, and this is more about the annihilation of the ego and this sort of broader enlightenment ascendance concept. So if you're looking into Enochian, there's going to be a lot more of that and a lot less of like how to get the girl you want or the job you want, though you can do it in that way. Another would be that this is inherently safer than darker LHP or demonic practices. Angels are sort of like the security guards of the spiritual world. They will mess you up if you cross them. You need to be very careful. This system is mind-bending. Another would be that it immediately drives you crazy, because there are quite a few occultists who have sort of gone insane because of the Enochian system. Occultists going insane happens now and again, more than we would like, but it's one of those where you really, really need to stay grounded, because you're doing so many things on higher planes, higher kind of modes of thought, that grounding is so important. Doing your shadow work is so important, and doing sort of reality checks is really important, because this is something that can really mess you up in a lot of ways and has done that to a lot of occultists. John Dee and Kelly didn't really have normal jobs, so they had all the time in the world to do this stuff. For the average person, we can't do hours and hours of rituals a day. So if we do these systems, we need to remember our real life responsibilities and our real life needs and all the things outside of the esoteric that matter. My advice, if you want to get into this, is to read a lot of sources. I'll have a list of books linked in the description, not linked, but I put a list in every video of like recommended reading. So make sure you're doing your reading, make sure you're doing your due diligence, resource from a variety of sources, and just try your best to emulate these really big setups in what you can do. Just be careful about it and take it slow. This isn't something like sigils where you can just watch this video and immediately make a sigil. You're going to need to do a lot of research and a lot of work to make sure you're ready and to make sure that you're there. If you're questioning whether or not you're ready, I would give it a little bit more time and do a little bit more research and a little bit more digging and take it slow. Just because it's a popular system doesn't mean it's necessarily right for you in this moment. So consider that seriously and know what you're doing and be realistic with your current status and skill. And so I've been Georgina Rose. You've been watching Dot Darling. You can support me on Patreon, where I make full exclusive videos every month. I do ritual guides where I can write up little rituals. They're all themed. It's really fun. And I run a Discord. I also host the Esoteric Commentary podcast, Occultism with a Side of Salt, where I talk about issues in our community and give a commentary approach rather than a teaching approach. And that's on Spotify, YouTube, and also as a Patreon, where we do bonus episodes as well. If you want to support me and you can't join a Patreon, I have direct donations through Ko-Fi, and you can book a tarot reading or palm reading with me. So have a lovely day wherever you are, and your holy guardian angel will meet you in 93 days, so you don't need to bother with Enochian.